Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Today, I'm privileged and delighted to welcome a very, very old friend of the past 3 decades, a very senior HR professional and a process consultant, Ashok Malhotra. Ashok, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Ashok is the founder of EUM Lens, which is EUM stands for Existential Universe Mapper. As I mentioned, he's a process consultant for over 3 decades, and he's the author of a book titled Indian Managers and Organizations, Boons and Burdens. So Ashok, tell me, what would you say are 3 key milestones in your career or your life?
Tough one. See, milestones were normally associated with events.
Correct.
I think sometimes events are overemphasized.
Okay.
An event becomes significant in retrospect. Right? Like you drop a catch of a batsman, and the batsman goes on to make a big score.
Correct.
That becomes a very significant milestone.
Well said.
If the batsman gets out in the next ball, it's of no consequence.
Correct.
So events by themselves, whether they become milestones or not is another matter. To me, milestones are much more associated with shifts in perspectives.
Sure.
Shifts in values, beliefs, orientation, stuff like that. So if I look at it from that point of view, I suppose there have been plenty, but if I was to say one most significant one, I think that happened sometime during my late adolescence. As an adolescent, I was very proud of my rationality, my analytical, logical thinking, and stuff like that. Reason used to be my God. And I think the recognition that actually the human mind is a great reason manufacturing factory. We can manufacture reasons for no matter what we want.
Correct.
Right? Reason actually is a slave. Is a slave of our passions, our predispositions, our attitudes, beliefs, whatever we want. So this ground from which rationality emerges is a much more interesting thing to look at rather than get caught in rationality alone.
Well said.
I think so. This was it was a turning point for me in many ways. In terms of my way of looking at things and the career which I took up later and stuff like that. So I would say that was perhaps single most milestone.
Fair enough.
Other milestones are very similar. I don't want to.
I agree. So, before I start talking about EUM, for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation, tell me, what is a process consultant?
Process consultant, as the name suggests, is concerned with process, which means the focus is on how rather than what.
Okay.
So the process consultant is a kind of a facilitator who would point out in terms of how a system is engaging with whatever it is engaging. So if let's say an organization is trying to work out its strategy. Now in that strategy development, it would take care, listen to some quarters and not listen to some quarters. There will be certain things which will have greater influence. There will be power dynamics which will be at play. Some functions will receive greater emphasis than others. So all these are processes. How conflict is engaged with.
Okay. And is this primarily related to, your work is primarily related to the corporate sector, or processes in any other field of life also?
In any other field of life.
Okay.
It's essentially dealing with human drama, wherever that human drama is taking place, whether it's in the corporate life, whether it's in a family, whether it is in a non-government organization. In fact, good part of my work is also with the non-profit organization.
Okay, very interesting. So, Ashok, let's talk about an area that you have done a lot of work in, which is existential universe mapper.
Yeah.
Again, maybe it's a very basic question, but what is EUM?
EUM is actually a composite framework as also a suite of tools which map individual orientation, which map the system to which the individual belongs. We call EUM organization.
Okay.
So there is EUM I and EUM organization. And there is also how the two are linked with each other. See, what is very unique about EUM is that it is a bifocal instrument. It looks at the individual as also the context to which the individual belongs. Because one of the basic assumptions here is that you are not the same in every context.
Okay.
You are many times determined by the nature of context. So, how's the context that is held in your mind is a very significant determinant of who you are.
Okay.
So, EUM is a composite framework, and along with it, there are a suite of tools which map the individual, which map the organization. Answered your question, Ashutosh?
No, I haven't understood it clearly. And if I haven't understood it, more than 80% of our viewers and listeners are below 34. So help me understand with an example then.
All right. So it will tell you what are some of the predispositions which Ashutosh has. All right.
Okay.
It will also say how is our Ashutosh looking at the system to which he belongs.
Okay.
So depending upon what is the nature of the system that he believes is, Ashutosh will bring in some parts of himself and will hold back some parts of himself.
Okay.
Right. For instance, Ashutosh may believe that, look, in this system, I should be bringing out my feelings. In this system, I should be, very careful about getting into conflict.
Okay.
So what Ashutosh is doing is not determined just by who Ashutosh is, but also what Ashutosh believes about the system are.
Okay. And then what do you do? You say if Ashok and Ashutosh are working in an organization and, specialists like you comes in, you will map what are my attributes and you'll map your attributes and then see if there's synergy. Is that what the process is?
That it can be used in different ways. So one way in which it can be used is that I will just map Ashutosh. I will say, okay, this is the way Ashutosh is, which is EUM I. And then I will also ask you to fill in EUM O, which will tell me what is the picture that you hold. And then I will have a conversation with you and say, Ashutosh, this is the way you see yourself. This is the way you see the system.
Okay.
These are the choices you seem to have made. Is it possible for you to look at some other choices?
Okay.
That these are some of the things, because you're finding an equilibrium. So what are the cost and benefit of that equilibrium? And how can you find a new equilibrium?
Okay.
That's one way in which one can look at it. And one can also do it, let's say, for a top management team. And you fill it for all of them. And then you also see the differences, that X looks at the system in one way, Y looks at the system in another way,
Correct.
Z looks at the system in another way. Right? And how, depending upon their perceptions, they are doing certain things or not doing certain things.
Okay.
So what kind of role taking, what kind of membership, what kind of dynamics which is taking place. So you work on that basis.
Okay.
And there are various ways in which it is used.
Understand. And say you're working with a team, then if the objective is probably to make sure that everyone's EUM I is in a direction so that it benefits the whole organization. Is that what it is?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
In fact, how do you use the creative potential of differences?
I see.
Everyone being on the same page is not a very great thing. It may sound very, maybe very convenient.
Okay.
But the creativity comes from differences.
Agree.
From dissonances.
Okay.
So how are the dissonances being engaged with? So you create a setting where people can say, okay, how best can we bring in and make the best out of these different things which different people are bringing onto the table.
Wonderful. And then, to continue from what you are saying, who then is the orchestra conductor who's bringing the different skill sets to make the right kind of music for the organization?
But it is the group itself.
Okay.
The consultant, the process consultant is a facilitator.
Okay.
The process consultant is only pointing out, right, that this is what may be happening.
Okay.
You may be taking this into account. Have you considered some other things? So there is a facilitator who's gently pushing the group into looking at some of the things which the group may, because many things, like processes I was telling you, oftentimes we are not conscious of those processes.
True.
We don't even recognize them. And if they are pointed out, you will find 10 reasons. So, for instance, if you tell a parent, you listen a lot more to one son and not to the other. Person will say, no, that's not true. Or will find thousands of reasons for doing so.
Well said, yeah.
So you kind of create settings where some of these things, processes which are taking place, which people are not very comfortable engaging with, you bring it to the surface. Only then a synergy can. But the basic charge has to be with the group. The consultant can't do that for them.
Okay. And one more question, which is that once you have given me the feedback or inputs, can I make discernible changes in my behavior patterns, etc., for the benefit of the organization, or do I tend to slip back again?
Well, it's really up to you, because these shifts, what you will do is it will provide you openings.
Okay.
It opens a door for you. Now, how much distance you walk is entirely up to you.
Okay.
And in that walking that distance, you may use a facilitator, a coach, or someone to work with you. You can also do it by yourself.
Okay.
You can start, but it's really the individuals' energy, individuals' investment, individuals' willingness to work with it that will take care of.
Very interesting. So, Ashok, you have worked with people across ages over the last 3-4 decades. The question I want to ask you is about the millennials and the Gen Zs. And your son and my sons are all the the millennials. What is your experience in terms of human beings and how they are evolving over the last 4-5 decades? People like you and me are what I call post-independence children, right? We have our own set of patterns, etc., behaviors, etc. What is your view of the younger people, which is the millennials and the Gen Zs, who are now inheriting the corporate world?
Ashutosh, this may sound counterintuitive, but actually what the data suggests is that there isn't too much of change.
Okay.
In fact, I have data of nearly over 50 years. The first time when we had used it, and after that has been. And we've analyzed the data across different cuts, including age cuts. The differences, on what seems like a very significant difference at the surface level, but at a deeper level, there isn't that much of change. They're very much like, you and me, their preoccupations, concerns, ways of doing things. There are some shifts. And at this point in time, and I'm only talking from the data.
Correct.
All right, I'm not talking in terms of, my own personal sensing, etc. But the data suggests some very, very minuscule, I suppose changes happen in a very, very small way in any case. So there are certain kinds of shifts which have taken place. And I'm now talking a little more about the Indian context. I don't know the global context that much. So for instance, one of the shifts, slight shifts which is happening, that in the earlier generations, your preoccupation was always with your immediate context.
Correct.
Not with yourself or with the larger context. So, your own family, your own department, your own company, your own this thing. So, The individuals had a very strong thing with their linkage with their immediate context, neither so much with themselves nor with the larger context. The newer generation, I think, is a little different.
Okay.
They have a little more anchored both in themselves, in terms of their beliefs, their opinions, etc., as also a little more concerned with wider things,
Okay.
with larger social issues. What are the kinds of things? They're not confined only to their immediate context. They have a little wider thing, right? And also a little more this thing. So it's, if you look at it at three levels, me, my immediate context, larger context. The earlier generations are primarily in the immediate context.
Correct.
Now there is a little more of the self, a little less of the immediate context, and a little more also of the larger context. So this is one of the shifts. At least that's what our data suggests.
Fabulous. I mean, I've never heard it so well defined. Thank you so much. So I'm now also going to move to your book, Indian Managers and Organizations, Boons and Burdens. Tell me a little bit about the book and what were some of your hypotheses when you wrote it?
All right. One of the things which stems from, human beings are the same anywhere.
Correct.
Whether it is India, whether it is England, whether it is US, whether it is China, human beings deal with the same issues, same concerns, same preoccupations, but the nuances differ. There are differences which are subtle and which are not of either or kind of thing. For instance, let's say the tension between ambition and contentment.
Correct.
Every culture faces this. Some cultures lean a little more towards ambition. Some cultures lean a little more towards contentment. It is not that in the contentment-centric cultures there is no ambition, or in the ambition-centric cultures there is no contentment.
Sure.
But it's a leaning difference. All right. And these leanings are important. So one needs to understand what are the predispositions. Human beings, in a sense, are products of the times they live in, and they are also products of the culture to which they belong. So both are important.
Correct.
So in this sense, my concern was to understand the predispositions of the Indian managers, not in absolute sense, but in terms of the leanings.
Okay.
And also that how does it fit with what I call the imperatives of the corporate world.
Okay.
Because the corporate world has evolved in a certain context, largely in the Western context. Our ways of understanding management, organization, processes, etc. are largely from West. So how is this, what is the interplay between these two?
Okay.
So the book is essentially about looking at this interplay. And it uses the data that we have, and we have large amount of data from Hume, from the Hume research about individuals and organizations. So it uses the data which is from the Hume research, and then tries and looks at. It also looks at the other scholars, what they have said about Indianness. So it's, how does Indian perspective relate to the corporate imperatives? That's what the book is about.
Okay. And I'm not sure this is the right question or not, or whether there's a short answer, but what are some of the boons and burdens of Indian managers?
Oh, well, you see, as I said, that since there is a tension between the two, between the Indian ways of looking at things and the corporate ways of looking.
Correct.
For instance, the Indian ways of looking at things leans a lot more towards imperatives of the belonging system. Right? Like the corporate way, if I was to use an expression, is essentially determined by what Ayn Rand would have called enlightened self-interest.
Correct.
Its basic assumption is that the individual is working with an enlightened self-interest, and
Absolutely.
if everyone works with enlightened self-interest, everything would be
Mm.
fine. That's
Mm.
a basic assumption on
True.
which the corporate philosophy is built.
Mm.
Okay. Now, this is not the way the Indians look at it.
Mm.
Right? Indians look at it that, look, if I'm fulfilling the role assigned to me in my context, that's
Mm.
what is important.
Okay.
So the ambition also, for instance, now it's a little different, but
Uh-huh.
for earlier people, they always also justified their ambition.
Mm.
I'm doing it for my family.
Mm.
I'm doing it for my organization. That I'm doing it for myself
Was not acceptable. I
is
agree.
not acceptable.
I agree.
You justify it on that basis.
Uh,
So there is a different leaning. Now this tension creates the burden
okay.
for the Indian manager to manage these two things.
Mm.
But this tension is also a boon.
Mm.
It's a boon because it offers new creative possibilities.
Mm.
And in my experience, managers and leaders who are able to co-hold both their Indian leanings and the corporate imperatives do great work.
Amazing.
They are extremely successful.
Mm.
They do great things.
Mm.
Because actually, it's not that whether the corporate imperatives are better or Indian leanings are better.
Mm.
They both are of a certain kind.
Right.
And the Indian managers have the problem to, they can be torn apart between the two,
Mm.
or they can actually learn how to utilize both of them. That's the real boon which the Indian manager.
Very, very fascinating. I could keep talking to you about it for hours on this subject.
I know it's not something which, as you said,
It is absolutely fascinating. But given my own time constraints, I'm going to move to the next segment, which are some questions for you personally. And
Sure.
I have time for maybe two questions.
Okay.
My first question, Ashok, and we all have done a lot, achieved a lot. In as you stand today, and as you look back, and as you look ahead, what does success mean to Ashok?
Success is a very subjective thing.
Absolutely.
I think success, whether you're successful or not, essentially what it means is feeling successful,
Mhm.
whether you feel you are successful or not.
Correct.
And to me, the litmus test of that
Mhm.
is zest for life.
Okay.
If you have zest for life,
Mhm.
it means you're feeling successful.
Terrific. Terrific.
If you enjoy getting up in the morning, if you enjoy doing what you are doing, if you feel playful,
Mhm.
whatever you are doing,
Mhm.
it means you are successful.
Wonderful.
Whether or not, your external achievements are there or they are not there, they will come, they will go.
Mhm.
But to me, retention of zest for life is the essential litmus test of success
Wonderful.
as far as I'm concerned.
Wonderful. And my now last question to you, Ashok. And this is for the thousands of young people who will be, and given your incredible experience and your own journey, what would your advice be to a young manager who is starting off on their journey in the corporate sector?
Well, advice is always contextual. Without the context, it's very difficult to
Agree?
give advice.
So you help me define your context. I mean, I'm joining at
Tell you what
21
my
years
wish
old.
is. I'll tell you what my wish rather than an advice.
Okay.
See, increasingly, the world is becoming very corporatized. Today, the corporates have a lot more power than even nation states have.
Right.
There's a large part of the power, this entire way of looking at things, etc., is determined by the corporates.
Correct.
Right? Now, in this, people who are in this world, for them to ensure that they don't just become instruments of performance and don't treat other people only as instruments of performance and retain their essential humanness. Because these are people who are going to take decisions, make choices which affects millions of people. not just their own employees, but also their customers, other partners. So not let this corporate power overwhelm them.
Okay.
And be able to take it and be able to, if I may put it very simply, it would be if they can move, not get caught in the employee mindset, but move from that to a member mindset.
Okay.
That I'm a member of this system. I have a stake in this system.
Very
I
interesting.
can impact this system. I'm not just a recipient. I'm not just an employee. So my wish is that more and more people move away from an employee mindset to a member mindset. That's a wish.
Very nice. Very nice. Ashok, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I'm grateful you agreed to come and talk to me, and I wish you lots of success.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It was wonderful talking to you, reconnecting with you after such a long time.
I agree.
And let's keep in touch.
We must do that. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.